Everyone, welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday, and today I thought it would be interesting to address a film that I think is considered widely by the movie-going community as being one of the worst out there. I personally don't think it is as bad as maybe some other films that I have had the unfortunate event of either seeing completely or seeing parts of. But it does serve as a perfect example of how you do not execute a movie, in particular, a superhero movie. And as you can see by that title that I have put in the title box, that is Batman and Robin. Yes, we are going to be talking about this movie and what I would have done, because even a crappy product like Batman and Robin can be improved upon in certain ways. Not saying that it would have definitely been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, especially with its subject matter and with its sort of tone, I guess you could say as well. But again, I think there could have been a whole lot of improvements that could have ultimately resulted in something better. And that's what I intend to talk about today. First off, this film likes to emphasize its one-liners, because there are a lot of one-liners in this movie. A lot of them. Not only just one-liners, but really bad puns and really lame jokes too. So the comedy doesn't really suit it all that well, especially with a Batman film. I mean, usually when you're making a film that is about a particular subject matter, and particularly a subject matter that involves Batman, you'd think that you kind of would probably at least tone down the comedy. I mean, yes, there are comedic moments within the older Batman films. I mean, yes, they tried to up the camp a little bit. I mean, even the first Batman that came out, there was a little bit of goofy and odd moments, but at least it tried to create a story around that and not make that the focus or the center attention, the comedy, or try to shoehorn in comedy. And this film tries to shoehorn it in and make it a big staple because constantly there's these one-liners and these puns going on and these really insufferable jokes that you can't wrap your mind around the focus of the story and what the story should be. And I think this was a huge detriment to the film, and I think definitely they should have taken all of those comedic bits out. They should have not tried to go the comedy route. They should have had a little bit of funny moments here and there, but kept that to a minimum because it's a Batman movie. We don't go for the comedy. We go because it's Batman and we want to see Batman fighting. We want to see Batman develop as a character. And we want to see him ultimately outwit a villain. That's what the audience wants. Not Batman and Robin going up against each other with all these really stupid lines that don't serve any purpose to the story. And don't add any value to the script. Again, that needed to be taken out. That whole script needed to have all of and every single pun in there taken out and not used, because it really downgraded the ability for the actors to really take this project all that seriously, I think. And you can really tell by the performances that definitely the script was was one of the major reasons why this film got canned so heavily by the public. So yes, that definitely needed to change. You can have campiness. I am not saying that you need to go all The Dark Knight, you don't need to go into Nolanville. You can still keep it true to sort of the traditional camp that we've seen of Batman, but you don't need to make it the center focus of the movie and make it constantly within the dialogue, because that's not what we go to see a Batman movie for. So yeah, that definitely needed a rewrite. Also, the action sequences is another point that I wanted to make. The action sequences in this movie are so lamely, so horribly and stupid looking that they don't serve any amount of weight to the characters and to the story. What I mean by that is I understand that there's some kind of camp to sort of the fighting with the traditional Batman films, and you sort of combined that in, but you still at the same time created tension within the action sequences. But these action sequences, like Batman and Robin on skates and like playing hockey almost at one point, like, and it's just so unbelievably lame. There's just tons of moments where the action is definitely not suited to get the audience's attention, because it is not gripping, it is not engaging, and it's just so unbelievably ridiculous and nonsensical that you just sit there going, what the heck am I watching? Am I even watching a Batman movie? And this was the movie's problem, is it didn't remain true to Batman. It didn't remain true to the camp, and it didn't remain true to the dark either. And it didn't try to combine the elements either. So there were a lot of things that happened as far as choreography is concerned that I think ultimately made this film so unbelievably unbearable to even enjoy the action sequences. You got the dialogue that's so bad, and then on top of that you have these really, really god-awful action sequences. So the movie doesn't add any value there visually. And it's really what makes ultimately it look really cartoony. And thing is too is I don't like putting comic books on the same level as a cartoon, because I know cartoons are usually different than comics. Comics have a little bit of a more serious style and approach to them. And clearly I don't think it was trying to embrace the campiness, while at the same time balancing out with an interesting storyline. And you can clearly tell that with these action sequences, they did not do Batman justice, I think, in any way. And there is the one element that this movie tries to put in that resembles anything that we could probably get from a Batman movie, and that is somebody dying, or at least two people that are dying. The butler, but more importantly, because the butler is not really all that focused on, and even then his sort of disease is just sort of shoehorned in. But there is this point to the plot to where Freeze, who is the villain played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, his wife is passing away. And he tries to keep her alive in this weird looking thing. And I think they could have executed his character a whole lot better had they focused on that sort of story element. And you could see how that sort of tears him apart. But what does this movie do to screw that whole storyline up and make it so that this film doesn't have any potential to have this storyline in? Well, how about Mr. Freeze wearing slippers? I am not kidding you. He wears not moccasins, but polar bear slippers. how can I even say that? How am I able to say this with a straight face? I am not kidding you. And then he has Eskimos singing a song about freezing and snow and oh god, it's so horrible. It's so bad. I mean, they took the one thing that they had going for it and they just shoehorned it with all of this junk. Because it was trying to be a comedy. It was really trying to be a comedy. And it's like, no, you're doing a comic book character. An actual comic book character. You can't just insert comedy and even then really lame, stupid, unnecessary comedy. So yeah, there's just a lot of things that that are added into Freeze as a character that doesn't make the audience take him seriously or feel really anything for his character because all he does is go around and doing goofy stuff like I mentioned with the slippers that are polar bears. I can't get over that. And and he goes around saying lines that again, he gets probably the most puns in this entire movie. Guess what the puns revolve around on? Ice. So yes, really just did not know how to handle his character at all as a villain. I mean, um, definitely was a huge weakness on the movie's part and definitely needed to be improved upon. And let's talk now about another point that I want to make. That's in regards to Batman making public appearances. Now, if you're doing a Batman film, you usually don't do that because Batman has a whole thing of being a secret. That was like literally emphasized in the first Batman movie that he didn't want people figuring out who the heck he was. And apparently now it's okay to go out and go to really stupid auctions to buy women out on a date. I mean, I don't know, it's stupid. Just go with it. And then guess what? He pulls out the Bat credit card, and this is where I think probably anybody that attempted to watch this movie probably walked out because that was just a low of what we would consider anything associated with Batman. Why do you need to show him having a Bat credit card? You don't need to show him having a Bat credit card. There's no reason to show Batman having a Bat credit card. Even if he does have a Bat credit card, why do we care? The audience does not care. At the end of the day, we don't bother with that. And I mean, say you want about, the whole, you know, buying women out on a date thing. Um, but even when Batman was being that billionaire or millionaire playboy, at least there were more subtle ways of doing it. Like, I believe it was in Batman Begins where, he comes out and there's all these women around him or whatever. At least that, and he's not, in disguise. He's Bruce Wayne. He's not Batman. At least that makes sense. This whole shenanigans of Batman makes absolutely no sense. Uh, and again, they needed to not put Batman in the spotlight. They really needed to keep that mysterious undertone to the film because that's what Batman represents. He represents hiding in the shadows. He's the person that you see and then he's gone. He's Batman. That's how he rolls. I mean, he's supposed to be not really around where a lot of people are. He's just supposed to go in and do his job and leave. That's what he does. He doesn't go and make appearances in front of people and bets on women out in public like that. Like, that's just so stupid. Yeah. Okay. Enough on that point. Also, Robin is another huge problem in this film. but in a different way than Batman. With Batman, I think George Clooney does. I mean, he's playing George Clooney, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you they should have kept Michael Keaton. But still, I think George Clooney was trying, but at the same time, I feel like, there was just no material for him to work with. Um, but I don't think they made Batman's character, they didn't make him a bother, I think, to the audience, but I think it was more of they were representing Batman in the wrong way. Um, again, having him make public appearances, and trying to be a show off like that, with the back credit card, and just putting in really dumb scenarios with his character. But with Robin's character, it's just the fact that his character is annoying. The reason why his character, I think, is annoying is because he constantly complains. And I know he's supposed to be the young kid. I know he's supposed to be kind of like that one person that that's kind of in the way at times, but he has, I guess, some I guess charm still, and just Batman just keeps him there as as a good side kick, but man, in this movie, do they make him obnoxious. He constantly whines, and all his dialogue, you just hear the wah 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 complaining, and you don't hear anything that ultimately results in any kind of growth with his character, which I think they actually could have done well. And again, since this film is titled Batman and Robin, it should be about Batman and Robin. But no, this film feels like it needs to insert the butler as a main point, because again, yeah, they make the butler, uh, um, Alfred, ultimately they basically just give him some kind of disease, that he's suffering from, and his niece comes to visit, who I believe is named Barbara or something. And man, that those characters didn't need to be in the forefront of this movie. They should not be the focus. You know why they shouldn't be the focus? Because the focus should be Batman and Robin, because Batman and Robin is the title of the movie. And they could have handled the whole Batman and Robin not getting along a whole lot better, and made a whole lot more interesting story than them fighting over Uma Thurman, who plays Poison Ivy. They could have gotten into a whole other interesting. They could have had a lot more interesting chemistry had the focus been on them. And ultimately, we see their trials and tribulations, but then at the same time, we see how they work off one another to ultimately save the day. That should have been the focus of the movie. And maybe, it could have been like a training thing too. We don't even see Robin until, or ultimately Robin doesn't become Robin until maybe the midsection of the film, because Batman is being like a mentor to him, because isn't that what Batman's supposed to be? He's supposed to be, helping this kid so that he can help him go fight crime. I mean, there should have been a whole lot more of a dynamic relationship between these two characters in order for this kind of a story to work, And again, you could have had that rebellious teenager, like everybody's given up on him, but Batman sees something in the kid, so he brings him in, and he teaches him to basically become a man, and go and develop him into a better human being as a result. You could have, again, Robin could have just been some kid on the street, and Batman could have just taken him in and saw some potential in him and trained him, and that could have been your focus of the movie. That would have been a whole lot more interesting than any of the jumbled up messes of a plot this movie brings. So yes, that needed to be the focus. And there needed to be a deletion of all the very strange and awkward moments within the film. And again, pushing the I think Alfred, and not even including Barbara, would have made this film actually, I think, a whole lot better. I think they could have still kept two villains. I think they still could have kept Freeze, and they still could have kept Poison Ivy. But what they should have done is executed the whole plot better in how these two ultimately end up coming together. You could have had Poison Ivy through some elaborate way ultimately become who she is, and then feeling lost, she sees how that there's these other people who have supposedly superpowers, maybe even Batman and Robin, and she ultimately uses her powers for bad as opposed to good, because maybe you could argue that the chemical reactions and the fact that she kind of is angry with society, because again, the whole plot that they put in for her is that she figures out that her boss, I believe, is supposedly doing some very shady things, but he tries to kill her, but then ultimately she turns into Poison Ivy. But I think you definitely could have created a more elaborate plot with her, like how she was trying to maybe take part in some kind of experiment, but then something went wrong, and she the maybe the company she works for is still gonna go along with the product supposedly that they're making, but she tells them, no, you can't do that because look at what it did to me. But then they basically fire her and put her sort of under the bus, and then everybody thinks she's crazy, and then basically she just goes mad and, wants to seek revenge. And so she thinks that Batman, and having Batman and Robin with her, like, hey, the most popular supposed superheroes in town, I'll be good to have them on my side. And Batman and Robin don't take her seriously. They reject her. And so she ultimately ends up getting in contact with Mr. Freeze. She sees that Mr. Freeze's she sees that Mr. Freeze's wife is passing away. Maybe she could even grow attached to Mr. Freeze, because Mr. Freeze ultimately accepts her, and appreciates her. But you see that Mr. Freeze still loves his coma-ridden wife, and she has a sense of jealousy as a motivation, and she also has a sense of getting back at Batman and Robin. So what does she do? She pulls the plug on the wife, like she actually does within the film. But instead, there needed to be a whole elaborate explanation tying somehow Batman and Robin into committing the murder of Mr. Freeze's wife. And so yeah, that's basically how she works, and it would definitely, I think, have suited the plot a whole lot better than just shoehorning her in and then giving her this whole stupid scenario of her wanting to take over the world. There's no reason she wants to take over the world. She wants revenge. That's it. That's all you need to put in there. So yeah, I think that's her sort of that's just her story, basically. Just some elaborate experiment that went wrong on her, and she wants to prevent it from ever happening again, but nobody wants to listen to her because they want to make money, and they don't care if anything bad happens to them. Because they've all got, maybe she works for like a really big company, and they all got good lawyers in case something were to ever happen if they got sued or something. And also, maybe what happened to her was like a rare case too. So they could say, I mean, heck, if it's gonna happen to 1 out of 1 million people, I mean, we're not gonna bother not going through with it. So yeah, you kind of see um, ultimately the motivations playing out sort of there, and as to why Poison Ivy would be angry at something like this. So again, some kind of elaborate way into her wanting revenge on society, I think definitely would have suited the story a whole lot better than just shoehorning this idea of, yeah, she wants to take over the world because her boss was doing something evil and tried to kill her. Because, I mean, even they show her within the film killing her boss when she turns into Poison Ivy, so it's like, okay, you got your revenge, why do you need to go out and do damage onto the world or whatever? But if the whole world can't take her seriously and the whole world sort of rejects her, then I think there's more of a motivation for her to seek revenge out on society as a whole than opposed to one particular person. So yeah, I think that would have suited the story a whole lot better. Some kind of elaborate plot where she is conned by society and she's considered an outcast. That would have suited the story a whole lot better. So that's kind of ultimately my understanding of the plot with her. Freeze, they just should have kept it, straight up. He wants to help out his wife who's dying of an illness, but ultimately, through a misunderstanding and basically a lie that Poison Ivy tells him, he ultimately goes insane, and the cures that he tries to, or I guess you could make it so that he tries to experiment on himself, like certain kinds of drugs in order to see if there'd be something to cure his wife or something. And that could have gone all awry too and could have messed him up even more, or could have actually happened maybe before the whole death of the wife. And then once, she's gone, he just goes mad into rage, and then he just sort of becomes Mr. Freeze, so to speak, somehow, in some elaborate way. I'm sure that there's some things that they could have pulled from the comics that at least would have suited this story well. But yeah, something to that effect where it was a little bit more on the serious side as opposed to him dressing up in polar bear slippers. I can't get over that. So yeah, had they kept it at that, that would have been good. So Batman and Robin, Poison Ivy, and Freeze. Those are the three main story lines that you needed to have in your film, and ultimately just have them all culminate together in some way to where we get to see their powers, where we get to see how the heroes defeat the villains, and at the same time create an interesting dynamic between Batman and Robin, which really did need to be there for this film to really work. So yeah, I think that's ultimately all the changes that I would have made to make it into a story that I think could have probably suited audience members a little bit better. So yeah, I think had it been around those lines, had it been more about the villains and the heroes and less about the comedy, less about trying to generate campiness, and not inserting other characters that don't really need to be there and don't really serve ultimately a real purpose within the story except just to be kind of shoehorned in, then we definitely would have had, I think, a better product. In regards to the Poison Ivy storyline, I think the way you could make this make sense is just have her have some experiment go wrong, and and then nobody really ultimately believes in her claims of the experiment, um, and as a result of the experiment that was done onto her, she ends up developing these kinds of powers, and nobody ends up really taking her too seriously. And then, as a revenge, sort of, she um, goes out using her seductive nature in order to gain maybe some kind of purpose within society and to gain sort of power too, you could say. And yeah, I think just some elaborate con so that she's so that ultimately she ends up being shunned by society. That I think would have worked a whole lot better for her as a character. Um, and again, I think they could have done it in a way to where it would have ultimately worked. I think there could have been multiple avenues, but it's kind of difficult to um, to do it in such a in such a way. But I think with something like you know, not being taken seriously, I think would have suited her fairly well. Um, but her storyline, I think, is probably the most difficult to do, especially when I personally don't have knowledge of her whole backstory. But again, maybe if they even used her backstory, that was probably within the comics, they probably could have came up with something a little bit more stronger than what they gave her. But yeah, I think that's really all that needed to be done. Is we just needed better storylines from the villains, a more dynamic duo, straight duo of Batman and Robin, and yeah, then this film would have probably been a whole lot better. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.